The site of an ancient Celtic monastery on the Wenlock Edge in Shropshire is home to Robert Hart's forest garden. Inspired by the urge to create a practical solution to world hunger whilst caring for his handicapped brother, Robert has carved out a haven of tranquility and abundance. His vision was to plant a miniature edible forest which could fulfill the needs of a healthy diet in beautiful surroundings. Some 30 years later, this mature garden in Welsh border country now serves as a model of what can be achieved in any backyard. Success depends on the understanding that useful plants can be grown in a succession of layers which imitate nature.
The natural forest is regarded as having 7 stories, as they say. The top story being tall, light-demanding trees. The second story is short, shade-tolerant trees. The third story is the shrub level. The fourth, the herbaceous. The fifth comprises plants that spread horizontally. The sixth is the rhizosphere, or root area, and the seventh is the vertical layer, comprising climbers and creepers.
Mahatma Gandhi has been the enduring inspiration for this vibrant greenery. His vision of a world order based on democratically organised, self-sustaining small communities is the guiding principle of Robert's work. But other influences are to be found amongst the trees which have both practical and spiritual significance.
This tree is a Japanese ornamental plum dedicated to Toyohiko Kagawa, who was known as the Japanese Gandhi. He was a Christian evangelist and also a political and social reformer. He spent half his life in prison and the other half advising government departments on such questions as slum clearance. Like Gandhi, he was vitally interested in all aspects of human welfare, and at one time he became concerned about erosion in the Japanese Alps, which had been caused by wholesale deforestation. He realized that the only basic answer was a program of tree planting, and the only way to induce the hill farmers to plant trees was to get them to plant fodder-bearing trees which would provide food for their animals as well as halting erosion. He was thus, as far as one knows, the first man in history to see the link between conservation and food production.
Since the death of his brother, Robert's time is now divided between writing and gardening. Together with former railway engineer Garnet Jones, he carries out the routine maintenance of the garden using techniques which have been researched and refined over the years.
As far as possible, this whole garden is kept permanently mulched throughout the year. Mulching not only helps to build up the fertility of the soil and suppress weeds, but it provides ideal conditions for the soil organisms. That is, conditions that are relatively warm and dry in the winter and relatively cool and moist in the summer, which are the conditions which are relished by the living soil organisms such as earthworms and innumerable microfauna and microfungi, which are the main sources of fertility. The high art of organic growing is producing really good compost. And a really good compost comprises the widest possible variety of organic materials. Among the most useful of organic materials are woody plants, but obviously they take a very long time to rot down, so to convert them into compost, they have to be shredded. I have an excellent German shredding machine, and woody materials such as hedge cuttings are passed through that. That is another form of non-animal manure.
The most striking features of the garden are its fertility and lack of pests and diseases.
I don't use any chemicals on this place at all, but use foliar sprays of seaweed, liquid comfrey, and liquid nettles. These do not have the effect of destroying bugs and germs, but build up the natural disease and pest resistance of the plants. And also an extremely interesting subject, which is being studied, especially in the Far East, is the relationship between different plants. That is a study that is very much in its infancy in the West. The way that certain plants seem to benefit each other, stimulate each other's growth, and ward off each other's pests and diseases.
At first, it's not easy to identify the different layers in the lush density of the forest garden, but a guided tour soon unravels the complexity to reveal an intriguing design.
This shows 4 of the 7 layers of the natural forest. First, this is an old pear tree which constitutes what is called the canopy. That is the highest layer of the 7th layer of the natural forest. Then the low tree layer, this is a stag's horn sumac, which the Americans call a lemonade tree, which constitutes the low tree layer of shade-tolerant short trees. Below that is the shrub layer, consisting of currants, gooseberries, and other soft fruit bushes. This, for instance, is a black currant. Below that is the herbaceous layer, consisting of herbs, such as this apple mint and that woundwort. Starting from the shrub layer or low tree layer, this is a Japanese wineberry, a very choice berry which the Japanese make into wine. Below that, covering the ground, is this, which is also a member of the same raspberry blackberry family, called Rubus nutans, which spreads horizontally by underground rhizomes, so it's liable to turn up all over the place, and it produces a small sweet berry. The 6th of the 7 layers is the rhizosphere or roots layer, where are grown plants that are cultivated for their roots or tubers. This is a plant called mashua, which comes from the Andes, where the potatoes also come from. And it's a kind of small potato with a nasturtium-like flower, a very attractive flower of the nasturtium family. This is an example of the 7th layer, or vertical layer, consisting of climbers. In this case, a nasturtium and a runner bean, which are about to climb this old wild cherry tree. Last year I had a nasturtium and a runner bean trained up an edible rowan, and they climbed almost to the top. It was strange to see runner beans in the branches of the rowan tree. Well, this is another example of the plants that cover the vertical dimension, originally called a Chinese gooseberry, but first imported into New Zealand, so it's become called a kiwi fruit. It is a climber. Bill Mollison, the founder of Permaculture, told me that kiwi fruits climb to great heights up trees in Tasmania. So I'm hoping this will climb too.
Robert's near neighbour is psychotherapist Virginia Smith. They're currently exploring the links between personal and planetary health.
Something you said last week, Robert, about unlocking the fertility of the soil. Can you repeat that?
Well, you quoted some words by William Blake saying that the mind of man is a garden already planted and sown, and it's a question of cherishing the plants that are already there. And I think it applies really very much to the soil as well. They speak of fertility being locked up in the soil, and one of the main aims of promoting fertility is not something that one puts on so much as releases that is already there. It's a question of allowing the activities of such things as soil roots and earthworms that make channels in the soil and therefore build up the circulating system so that the energy and fertility that's already in the soil is free to circulate.
Nature's complex web of inputs, checks and balances are constantly encouraged, minimizing the effects of drought and ensuring a constant cycle of fertility. The result is healthy crops which supply a local greengrocer and whole food restaurant. In imitation of the natural forest, clearings exist for more conventional growing. Sun-loving plants can thrive here. Thousand-head kale and alexanders grow alongside broad beans, potatoes and other well-known vegetables. Nearby is Robert's most recent innovation of a forest garden in miniature, which demonstrates the degree of maturity that can be achieved in under 4 years. It's largely a mixture of fruit trees, fruit bushes and herbs. At one end is a pea tree whose edible pods form an important part of the diet in Siberia. To the untrained eye, the profusion of exotic species thriving on Robert's land seems bewildering. However, it's relatively easy to create a backyard forest garden using familiar trees and plants.
The advice I give to anyone who asks me how to start a forest garden from scratch is to plant an orchard of standard fruit trees at recommended intervals, that is about 20 feet each way. Then plant dwarf trees in midway between the standard trees, plant fruit bushes, currants and gooseberries, in between the trees, and plant herbs and perennial vegetables on the ground level. Once it's established, the main work is cutting back plants that try to encroach on each other, which is something that has to be done pretty well every day during the growing season, and keeping the soil well mulched, thus suppressing weeds and building up the fertility. I think it's possible to say that it is a system combining maximum output for minimum labor.
Robert Hart has now successfully pioneered temperate forest gardening for 30 years. Through his writing and media appearances, he has inspired many others to take up the challenge of sustainable food production. "10 years as a London bus driver drove Ken Fern to look for an alternative way of life. After a period of grindingly hard work growing annual crops on a small plot in Surrey, he decided to investigate new ways of rearing plants, which were not quite so labour-intensive. Inspired by Robert Hart's ideas and the will to make their dreams a reality, Ken and his wife Ariadne finally settled on a 28-acre field in Cornwall, which is exposed to the full force of southwest winds blowing in from the Atlantic. Their immediate challenge was to plant 1.5 miles of hedges to check the devastating effects of wind damage and soil erosion. In addition, they established around 20,000 trees over 16 acres, and slowly the balance of nature is being restored. Ken can now supply information on 7,000 useful plants, and he's currently growing 1,500 species, which could influence the human-plant relationship for generations to come.
This tree is one of the reasons why we call ourselves Plants for a Future. It's the monkey puzzle tree, which is quite commonly grown in urban gardens. It's said to be a nice ornamental stately tree. But what most people don't realise, it produces a really delicious edible seed. It's about the size of an almond. It's got a lovely nutty flavour to it. About 150 years ago, some researchers found that this was potentially the highest yielding nut tree you can grow in this country. It's very sad to think that no one took it up then, because if they'd have been planting them then, I'd be eating the seeds now. Instead of that, I've got to wait until I'm about 80 years old before I can get the first seeds off this tree. This wonderful tree is called a sea buckthorn. And this particular species comes from the Himalayas. And there it's become a multi-million-pound industry where they grow it for the fruits, which are used to flavour fruit drinks, etc. And in Sweden, they've been doing a lot of research with these plants, and they found that these fruits contain certain essential fatty acids, which are really effective in either preventing cancer if you eat the fruits on a regular basis, or in curing cancer if you're suffering from the early stages of cancer. The fruit itself is quite small and tastes like a really sharp lemon. I personally quite like eating sharp fruits, but for people who don't, you just make a juice of it and mix it in with something else a bit sweeter. Now here's a shrub that you'll find in just so many gardens. It's called Elaeagnus, and it's widely grown as a hedge because it's really wind resistant. In fact, you can grow it right on the seashore without any problems at all. There's also various variegated forms with yellow in the foliage, which look quite nice, and they're often grown as specimen plants. What people don't realise is if you grow this with the yellow variegated forms, you can produce a really heavy crop of a tasty fruit, and it's ready in April. And if you can tell me any other fruit you can get out of your garden in April, I'd like to know about it. And it's not only got a nice edible fruit, which is about 2 centimetres long and about 1 centimetre fat, but inside that it's got a pretty tasty edible seed as well. So here you've got a nut, you've got a seed, and you've got a good hedge plant. Really, what else can you want to grow in your garden? This is an area where we grow many of the more conventional fruits, such as gooseberries and raspberries and blackcurrants. And this one, which is slightly less usual, is the Worcesterberry. You can see the fruits developing here. When they're fully ripe, they'll taste like a blackcurrant, but in the unripe stage, they taste more like a gooseberry. But even in this area where we're growing the more conventional fruits, because we are what we are a bit unconventional as well. You'll see growing by the side of it, this little hawthorn here. This isn't our native hawthorn, but it's a species from North America. And this particular one has fruits about the size of a cherry, with an absolutely delicious taste. And in a few years' time, this will be about 20, maybe 25 or 30 foot tall. It'll provide a little bit of shelter here for the soft fruit, which they'll appreciate. And we'll have, as a bonus, we'll have in September these really delicious fruits. There's something very special about water. Putting a pond in the garden really adds a wonderful atmosphere to the garden. This particular pond was only put in about 11 months ago. But already you can see there's quite a number of plants growing here, and there's loads of creatures living here. We've got water boatmen, we've got pond skaters, whirligig beetles, and we even had some toad spawn and frog spawn laid in here and some newts. My main problem with the pond is that when I start walking past it, I invariably sit down and just start watching what's going on, and it's half an hour gone before I'm even aware of it. So it stops me doing quite a lot of work, but it's quite worthwhile, I think. One of the plants we've got growing here is a little fern. It's called a zolla, and it's quite an interesting plant. It's very, very vigorous. We actually cleared all of it off here about a week ago. You can see how quickly it's grown back. In another week we're going to have to clear it off again. But that's a bonus because it's going to provide us with a lot of organic matter for our compost heap. And not only that, living on the roots of this fern, there's a little blue-green algae which puts nitrogen in there. So it's a really, really good compost activator. And whilst it's growing on the pond here, there's various creatures that can live amongst the roots and feed off it. And by giving a nice coating over the pond, it prevents too much algae growing. At the far end, there's a thing called some duck potatoes, and this is actually cultivated in China for its edible tuber, which is about the size of a large egg, and very starchy, a bit like a potato when you cook it. It's a staple crop out there, and there's no reason why it couldn't be a staple crop here as well. So you can have a pretty pond, and also produce quite a bit of food out of it.
An extraordinary range of perennial plants adorn Ken's salad bowl. The leaves of this campanula versicula combine with daffodil garlic flowers to create a beautiful dish. And it's in the salad bed where horticulturalists Ian and Martha Griffiths are introduced to some novel tastes.
Yeah, this little dandelion-like creature comes from the Mediterranean, and it's called Richardia picroides. I can't give you a common name for it, I'm afraid, because it hasn't got one. And we use this once again as a main part of the salad. You expect a dandelion-type plant to be bitter, but have a taste and see what you think.
Well, it's not bitter, is it?
Not even remotely, no.
Got a kind of musky taste or something, really.
Yeah.
Musty taste. That's what I mean to say.
What I think is really good about this plant is that we've yet to see a slug eat it.
Oh,
It is
very
good.
helpful, very
That's
helpful.
the
Yeah.
salad growers.
That's the salad grower's delight.
Yeah.
It's got, could you notice that there's a sort of a powdery nature on the leaf? Did you notice as you were holding
Yes,
it?
I did.
And I don't know if it's that does it, but
It protects the plant. Maybe the cat
Maybe.
can get at it.
Yeah.
Yes. Maybe it has a little bit of the flavour of the leaf. We don't know. Maybe.
No.
Yeah.
Could I have a bit more of that, Ken?
you certainly can.
Thank you. I think that's close to lettuce, that one.
Closer than the other, I think. Yes.
Oh, much.
Oh,
Oh, yes, that was a completely different flavour.
But you need a lot of leaves of this to make a salad. I've noticed you have a lot of this plant. Is that why? Because it's often
Partly, but
filler
also,
or-
well, what we should do really is cut it down, cut and come again basis.
Yeah.
But we tend
Yeah.
to let it flower, and then you've got the woody stems, and it's hard to harvest. But if you, when you plant the young plant, cut it down on a regular basis, you keep a good supply of young leaves, and then it's easy to
And what
harvest.
about the flower on this one?
Bitter. It's really bitter.
Don't
Don't eat
oh, I
that.
don't want to
No,
try that one.
no.
Now, here's a very common garden plant. I'm sure you'll recognise.
No, even I know that one.
Lovely daylily. Lovely.
That's it, the daylily.
But they are beautiful, yeah.
This particular one is called Lilio asphodilus. Bit of a mouthful. You can eat the flowers on these.
Scented.
Oh yes, a lovely scent. Just have a smell of those before you even try eating them.
Oh, lovely. Aren't they lovely?
Now,
Oh,
before
that's beautiful.
Hmm.
Just imagine having a salad with
It's
these
like-
in,
like-
coming in for dinner, and your whole salad bowl smells like this.
And is this
wonderful.
beautiful
That's wonderful.
colour? Yeah.
Yeah, there does have to be a slight health warning with this one though. It's only with this yellow flowered form, not with any of the other daylilies. But a certain percentage of women have detected an aftertaste in these, which they find unpleasant. In fact, a few have actually said it tastes like sweaty armpits.
Really?
So,
How come,
God.
from this lovely smell?
yeah, I've never
Mm.
detected it, and to date, no male has detected it. But
Isn't that strange? Well, just take off the pedal and go
you
for
can
it.
either go for the whole lot or take
No,
off
I'm
pedal
going to
at
do
a
it
time.
like you do it.
You've got the beautiful, the sweetest part is down here where the nectar is. But I tend to relish the flower and eat it part by part.
Oh, it's a fine texture compared with some of the other plants, isn't it?
Yeah. If you can get hold of the plant, there's a variety called Quanzo, which has got much
Quanzo.
larger flower and much thicker petals. And that is absolutely superb. And there's no after flavour for anybody in that one.
Oh, this is really refreshing, isn't it?
So far, no after flavor, but I'm still
You're
working on it.
getting
Yeah. I'm waiting for it.
I've got a leaf especially lined up to get rid of it for you if it comes.
And you eat the middle bit as well?
Everything, whole lot.
And the part we're holding?
That's the sweetest part.
Is it?
I leave that to last because that is the
All right.
sweetest part.
That's the real...
This part here has got the protein on it, so that's quite good. The pollen, I should say,
Pollen?
which is the protein source. And then you've got all the sugars in there. I tend not to eat the very little green base at the bottom. Not just edible plants that we grow.
Yeah.
We grow quite a few medicinal ones. There's a little shrub here.
Oh.
It is alive, I assure you. I know it's middle of June nearly.
Is it struggling?
No, it's just very, very late coming into leaf. It's a Mediterranean plant, and it's always really, really late. And it loses its leaves quite early as well. But it's called Vitex agnus castus, and it's got two common names. One is agnus castus, and the other one is chaste tree. That's chaste as impurity.
Mm-hmm.
And it produces a berry, which is a peppery flavour to it. And this berry has got certain medicinal properties, and I'd like to tell you a story to illustrate that. I got married about 10 years ago to my current wife, and when I married her, she wasn't menstruating. She was checked and she was infertile. And she was happy with that. She had no intention of ever having children, didn't want to know about them. But then I think it was about 4 years ago, she suddenly decided it might be nice if she had the potential, not that she wanted to have children, but if she had the potential to have children, that would be quite good. And so I put her on a course of this. I'd read about the plant. And these berries, they contain certain chemicals which mimic female hormones. And over a period of time, they can balance the hormonal level. And with her, it was a deficiency in whichever hormone it is that causes the egg to be passed down the channel. And that, I'm not sure the name of the hormone. But 6 months after taking this, there was quite noticeable physical changes in her. She'd been quite flat-breasted when I knew her, and she developed quite a sizable bust. And 12 months after taking it, she started having periods.
Oh,
And we've now got a little boy, 11 months old.
Well, we saw him earlier on.
She obviously changed her mind about having
Yeah,
children.
what a lovely boy he is too.
Yes.
Yeah.
To get plants for a future up and running has not been easy on such an exposed site. As with any garden, Ken ranks wind as public enemy number one.
Yeah, 50-mile-an-hour winds are considered quite normal here, and we've had winds of 90 miles an hour. In fact, a month after we moved down here, the shed was demolished by a wind. We put it up the previous summer, and then we saw it go down in front of our eyes. So wind is definitely the public enemy number one.
Plagues of mice and slugs have also delayed progress. But now birds of prey, slowworms, frogs and toads have moved in to contribute to the ecological balance as the system moves towards sustainability. For Ken, it's all been a learning experience. So where did he gain his encyclopedic knowledge of plants?
By making lots of mistakes. Once I decided I wanted to grow them, I spent a lot of time reading books, going to look at botanic gardens and other gardens to see the plants growing there and to see how they grew, how I'd want to grow them, what I thought of how they were doing. But basically it's just by making mistakes and then learning from them.
And can you tell me about your database and your list that you've compiled now?
Yeah, the database started in a very small way about 10 years ago when I had a little card system, and it was just a few hundred species that I personally liked. But the more I visited libraries, the more I learned about plants, the more I wanted to make it more comprehensive. And it's come now to a stage where we've got about, as I get over 7,000 species on the database. There's a lot of information about the plants, how to grow them, where they grow in the wild, how to use them, the different uses we've got of them. And we make that available to whoever wants it. We're in the process of getting a user-friendly interface so we can send a complete package out to people. But at the present, what we're doing is sending out the bare information, and they have to have their own database to run it on. But I do warn people they need a big disk for it, because it takes about, well, up to 30 megabytes of disk space depending on what format you want it in.
In return for theoretical knowledge, visitors are encouraged to work in the garden and gain practical experience. Now that Plants for a Future has been established in outline, what happens next?
Yeah, the framework's definitely there, but what we've got to do is increase the amount of plants we're growing, and as the shelter increases, manage to grow better plants than we're growing. Quite honestly, in many places we're growing quite poor quality plants because there's so much wind damage. So it's getting the hedges to grow, getting the protection up there, and then propagating the plants so we can actually supply them to people. So when people come here and see what we're doing, they taste the foods that we're growing, then we can say, here's the plants, take them, do it yourself.
28 acres is gardening on a grand scale, so how does this relate to ordinary householders?
Well, certainly on a garden level, when you've got a reasonably small piece of land, you've got the time to work it, it's very, very easy. On this sort of scale, you need quite a lot of people, obviously. But on a garden level, most of the plants we grow are pretty easy. They almost grow themselves. Because they're perennials or trees and shrubs, once you get them in, get them established, that's it. You just can come back and harvest them and just a bit of weeding. But that's it. You haven't got to do your sowing every year. You haven't got to worry about all the potential slug problems or a drought in the seedlings dying. You know, the plants are there and they grow themselves.
So is it essentially what you're trying to create, or what you can show people how to create, is a garden that you can eat?
A garden you can eat, a garden you can wear, a garden you can use as your medicines, a garden you can use as your fuel and to build your houses. Yeah, a garden for all purposes. And a garden you can enjoy as well, that you can sit in, and a garden that doesn't take up all your time. You can actually, for a few hours work each week, produce the things that you need.
A maisonette on the small housing estate in Hertfordshire, a few miles north of London, seems an unlikely place to find the influences of forest gardening. But the combination of Mike Guerra's design and Julia's practical application has created a tiny garden which is enormously productive. A small but significant contribution to the challenge of growing food locally.
You look at what in the world around us and you think everything is going to hell and you don't know what to do about it. But all of a sudden somebody says, think global, but act local. Fundamental to that. And what is more local than producing food for yourself? If you don't food produce for yourself, then somebody else is going to have to do it for you and use energy to do it. I had no idea how to grow any food. I had no idea about gardening. I was 30 years old before I realized how to grow food. And then I saw the Visionaries program with Bill Mollison on Channel 4, and all of a sudden it was illumination. It seemed so easy. He was just walking around, eating from his garden. There was no supermarket in between. There was no heavy lorries. There was no intensive use of poison. It was just there. It was in his garden. He was just walking around eating it. It was really that wonderful. And because you don't have any preconceptions about gardening, all of a sudden it becomes easy. Why isn't anybody else doing like that? And that's the approach we took. We grasped that with both hands and went out and turned our rubble-filled garden into what you see today. And it was easy. It was really easy. The other fundamental part of it was the idea that instead of just growing an allotment in our back garden, that we had that there was an opportunity to turn a two-dimensional landscape into a three-dimensional food-producing place. And one of the most important ways one of the most important inspirations for us was Robert Hart's forest garden, because everything is multi-layered, because everything is working together, everything is compact, everything has to be close together to work together. Then it became an important part of designing a small garden. If you don't go out with that attitude, saying, well, I can put in more in less area, and say, well, I'm just lazy, I can only do this little bit here, then the garden will fail because there isn't that close interaction, that close polyculture, that close diversity, which makes it all work like it does in nature. And nature is the biggest teacher. If you don't keep your eyes open, you'll never learn anything.
When we first moved into this ground floor maisonette, the back garden was completely paved. There was nothing there at all. And we had a side area of garden that was just lawn with a very invasive conifer tree, and the front garden was just purely lawn as well. So we decided we would start with the back garden, as that was the most unobtrusive and we could really have an experiment with that and find out what we wanted to do.
Learn gardening from scratch.
So to start with, we wanted to use what we had, So we decided to take up a lot of the pavings, stand them on their ends and create raised beds immediately by cementing bricks at the corners. We had to actually import a lot of the soil mix,
essentially
make our
all
own
of it.
soil, yes, because unfortunately with a lot of these new built houses there is no layer of soil underneath. It was just sand and builder's rubble, and it was impossible to dig into or do anything with it. So we abandoned that idea straight away, and through borrowing and begging materials from other people.
Any rough organic matter that we had
manure, compost.
Sand. We actually bought sand. We actually bought some manure. The most important thing for us, at least, to get the soil working was a little 3 bags of woodland soil with worms in it, woodland edge soil.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, if you go in the garden now and put your hands inside, you'll find there's a definite sponge structure, and it's there due to worms. We do no digging, and therefore we do no weeding. We do mulching on the surface. We let the worms do the work.
In the first season, we were actually able to grow a number of vegetables in this system. We were able to grow beans and potatoes and some salad vegetables, which was actually quite an achievement for us.
We read the back of the seed packets. That's the only we got to learn. It was only till later that we actually got books on gardening to see the husbandry of the different plants. But to get your hands dirty, get earth underneath the fingernails, to actually sow some seed and actually see it growing and for you to eat it, and then the bits that were left over you composted. The cycle there was important for us to get motivated. All of a sudden you felt a real attachment to the earth. There was a real reason to continue. It wasn't just a complete waste of time and money. You realised we had something that was worth continuing with. And it wasn't until we actually tried it out for ourselves that we realised how wonderful it all was and how easy.
A quick glance round the garden makes it clear that Julia and Mike have absorbed a lot of influences. Techniques of conventional organic growing, permaculture design and forest gardening are all apparent. Putting together these ideas contributes to the success of cultivating so much in such a small space.
Permaculture and forest gardening are two different things, to us at least. Permaculture is basically a design methodology, a philosophy, an ethic, a way of designing your landscape. Whereas forest gardening is basically a technique. It's a method of using or designing a multi-layered food-producing or output-producing structure, whether it be medicinal plants or whatever. You can use a forest garden or the elements of that within a permaculture design. Permaculture is not about techniques, it's about strategy, it's about design. Most of our garden, because it's so small, is what we would call a zone 1, which is intensive vegetables, herbs, soft fruit. But we have forest garden elements within that. We grow runner beans up some of the trees with an open canopy. We grow things layered up in front of us so everybody gets an equal chance at the sunlight. Everybody will get an equal chance at the soil layer. It's a matter of increasing yield while in the same area. We use a number of different ways of doing it. We use the strawberry tower, for instance, a way of doubling our area of strawberries by just simply placing one layer in mid-air on a structure, leaving sufficient light to get into the bottom layer. But they're basically techniques and structures within a permaculture design.
We try to use companion planting where we can in our garden design. For instance, the well-known companion planting is marigolds with tomatoes or basil with tomatoes to keep away pests and flies. But we also find what's very successful is growing onions or garlic along with other plants. We have a bed that integrates onions, parsnips and carrots together, and we find that there is something within the onions that seems to keep away carrot root fly. Similarly, with our apple trees, we've had a lot of success in the forest garden areas with growing chives and also lots of herbs at the base of the apple trees.
Yes.
And we found that's very successful in keeping away all sorts of pests, and we have no problems with them at all.
You can see the hoverflies and ladybirds picking up pollen from the chives and from the other herbs, and then going off and laying their eggs. And you can then see the hoverfly and ladybird larvae eating the greenfly on the apple trees. They're just adjacent. They're right there, and it's a really good companion. There's nothing mystical. There's nothing magical or unscientific about it. I mean, whether you believe in science or not, the results speak for themselves. You have a situation where the association is so apparent, then it's impossible to ignore it.
Ingenuity is the key to success in this tiny garden. Rotting compost generates heat, and this can be cleverly used to dry shallots or germinate seedlings. Even in the warm, insulated space above the compost bins, squashes or melons can be grown. But what of crops like potatoes, which normally require a large space to reach maturity?
Growing potatoes in tyres is a really good way of growing a large crop in a small area. It's a bit more intensive than the normal potato growing method. But what you can do is you can use horse manure 3 times, and you can also grow more potatoes in the same area than you would otherwise. Simply, we use the freshly composted horse manure that we've used to heat up the hot box. We take it out and we put layers. We put the seed potatoes on newspaper at the bottom of the first tyre, put this rough compost around it. As the potato plant grows above the first tyre, we put another tyre on, more compost in, another tyre, more compost in, until you've basically filled 3 or 4 tyres. Then you let the tubers grow off the side shoots of the main stem, which the potato plant will do. And you end up with 10 to 20 pounds of potatoes, depending on variety, depending on the growing conditions. And you have a really friable potting compost from the horse manure at the end of it. So you've used the horse manure 3 times, and you've got potatoes to boot.
The use of old tyres and redundant railway sleepers makes waste into a resource. Similarly, household scraps become useful items in the cycle of creating fertility.
The wormery is very useful to us indeed. Basically, all of our kitchen waste goes straight into the worm bin. It's very close, obviously, to the kitchen, just outside the back door. And we probably extract the material from it maybe once, possibly twice a year. It's very good for the compost itself. It's good for making a mix, potting compost or putting onto the garden. And we find we get a very good liquid drained from the worm compost.
Worm pea is jolly good.
Yes, we mix with water, and certainly for feeding tomatoes and those sort of plants at this time of the year, really gives them a good fillip.
Indeed, indeed. There's a lot of people seem to have a problem with wormeries. They either let them get too wet or too dry, or don't feed them often enough, or give them too many acid things. The trick is that we get our bread from the local bakers. He gives it to us in a bag, paper bag. We shred the bag, we put it in every time we buy a loaf of bread, 3 or 4 times a week. We also give a little bit of newspaper sometimes, sort of odd pieces of paper. A little bit of calcified seaweed is jolly useful if you like us eat a lot of chilies and onions and things like that, which are probably the worms don't find that digestible. But basically keeping the acid level down is really important, and making sure there's sufficient moisture retentive capacity. You can drain off the worm pit at the bottom regularly, and that keeps it down, but also adding woody material occasionally, and newspaper is really useful, any sort of paper product, because it absorbs some of the liquid, and it makes it more friable. The worms have an easier time of it, and it doesn't get hot.
The design, the ingenuity, the fertility are all there for anyone to see. But doesn't it amount to a lot of hard work, and is it really as productive as it looks?
We produce on our 75 metres squared about 400 to 500 pounds, which is about 250 kilos of food a year for the kitchen. That sort of works out at about 15 tonnes an acre, which is better than agricultural land. We do this with only 2 hours work in the garden a week. Indeed. We do not do any digging, we don't do any weeding. We just basically sow, maintain, and eat. We wanted to show that people could have a real life, but not be completely sort of tied and exhausted by producing food.
Obviously what we try to do is get as much range of produce over as many months as possible. It is difficult in the winter because our main growing area at the back garden is in fact north facing, which makes it very difficult, so we do actually have just a few hardy crops through the winter. But on average we manage to have produce for ourselves from about the middle of May all the way through to October. I mean, that gives us quite a lot of produce.
We even have some salads that grow over winter.
Yes,
we have
indeed.
little bits of greens here and now and again, which are really important to maintain sort of vitality. If you don't have green vegetables during the winter, you can feel very lackluster, and it's wonderful to have a bit of lamb's lettuce or a bit of rocket or a bit of overwintering chard, or some of the Japanese vegetables seems to survive some sort of frosting.
Yes.
It's really vital to have that sort of energy, or raw vegetable energy during the winter. Otherwise, winter becomes hell.
About 90% of our produce we will actually eat straight away. Although we get a lot of different things, there's usually not a glut of any one thing. Occasionally we can freeze some things. Runner beans obviously can be frozen and we can eat them possibly almost up to Christmas, which is good. We do sometimes get a slight glut of fruit, mainly sort of the soft fruit, raspberries, blackberries, and we actually make some jams. And I'm quite keen on using a lot of the herbs to make some vinegars for the kitchen use. So even in the months when we don't get fresh produce from the garden, there is usually something in the house that we've made.
We also store some vegetables. We store potatoes, onions, shallots, squashes, marrows, that sort of thing, which we have a small storage area for. But because we have to eat them fast because the storage area is within the house, therefore they're not cool enough. We have to eat those sort of by Christmas or in the middle of January. We don't really have a full year's produce.
At the moment.
At the moment.